Hello you guys, people out there, and welcome back to another video on the Rocket Hub. My name is Phil, and today I'm going to present you the first video of my new series. Welcome to Spaceflight DeepDives, my new series in which I will pick an interesting topic out of the world of spaceflight and tell you everything you need to know about it. Videos of this series will be longer and a bit more complex than my normal videos and therefore be released towards the end of every month. This is Spaceflight DeepDives. Currently, the only big player in the orbital launch business is clearly SpaceX, with some smaller competition from ULA Rocket Lab, but that may change soon. Blue Origin, the spaceflight company of Jeff Bezos,
Jeff who?
is planning to enter business at the end of next year and is already designing the first orbital rocket named New Glenn, named after the first American astronaut to achieve low Earth orbit. Despite being very busy, we haven't heard that much of Blue Origin's plans and only know a small bit about their current progress. So, in this deep dive video, we will take a closer look on the development of New Glenn and examine whether Blue Origin is truly capable of competing against SpaceX's monopoly. Blue Origin hasn't achieved that much in the past years. At least it seems to be like that. They have the New Shepard, a small single-stage vehicle designed to fly space tourists on suborbital flights up to an apogee of around 100 kilometers and then bring them back to Earth again. At the same time, Blue Origin is working on a descent stage of the lunar lander proposal for NASA's Artemis program made by the national team dubbed the Blue Moon Project. And they have developed their own variety of different engines, including the methane-powered closed-cycle BE-4 engine, which is going to power the upcoming Vulcan rocket by ULA. Altogether, you would expect a lot more to be achieved by Blue Origin, considering the fact that Blue Origin is 2 years older than SpaceX. Yep, that is correct, and therefore had a lot more time for development and testing. But in the same time, SpaceX has flown over 100 Falcon 9s and began to recover their boosters. Blue Origin has just conducted 14 flights of their New Shepard vehicle and a few small test hops like the Starhopper flights by SpaceX in 2019. So, what were they doing the whole time? Well, they were working on this. The New Glenn, Blue Origin's first and most likely smallest orbital rocket. Pay attention to the smallest here because this beast is absolutely enormous. Standing at a whopping 95 meters tall, New Glenn is approximately 1/3 taller than the Falcon 9 and heavy. It is a two-stage design similar to the Falcon 9 but way bigger and is powered by 7 Blue Origin's own BE-4 engines. A diameter of 7 meters enabled the New Glenn to house the by far biggest operational payload ferrying period, because Starship's payload bay will be nearly double the size of the new one on top of New Glenn, which has a volume of around 450 cubic meters. Its maximum payload weight is expected to be 45 tons, which is about 10 tons more than the maximum payload a Falcon Heavy can lift when it's fully reused. In its expandable configuration, the Falcon Heavy can lift up to 63 tons, which is a lot more, despite being the smaller vehicle, but that's because New Glenn will be reusable. New Glenn is designed to land on a modified ship, just like in a similar way that Falcon 9 does it on the drone ships, just the ship in New Glenn is going to be a lot bigger. And that for up to 25 reuses. Sounds amazing, but I won't believe that until they demonstrate it, because 25 reuses is a pretty ambitious goal. In theory, New Glenn sounds really great, but everyone can drop a big rocket and tell us how great it's going to be. So, how far is Blue Origin really in the development of New Glenn? Well, we don't exactly know it. Blue Origin hasn't been sharing that much information in the past, but there's actually a joke going around in the SpaceX community saying that they're just showing us a complete rocket one day and telling us that's what they've been working on the last decade. What started out as a joke has pretty much become reality. There's really no official information confirmed about the progress at all. But in the past, we have seen a few glimpses into Blue Origin's giant rocket factory in Florida, which at least gave us an idea of what the current state of New Glenn actually is. In the past, Blue Origin has shown us one half of New Glen's payload fairing, which surprisingly appears to be made out of carbon composites and is really huge, as well as a number of aluminum rings, which are parts of New Glen's fuel tanks. They have also shown us a lot of production equipment like friction stir welding machines welding the parts of the new rocket together. That was pretty much all they've shown us. Although we have seen some pictures being made by members of the community, this looks like an almost finished booster, which was confirmed a few days ago when Blue Origin showed us their factory and the booster inside it and confirmed our assumptions. At the moment, the booster consists of a fully assembled tank section made of the aluminum rings we've seen earlier, and as well as a white ring segment with four winglets looking exactly like the aerodynamic surfaces Blue Origin has shown us in their concept animation of New Glenn. The two parts aren't welded together, but assuming the aerodynamic surfaces will be sitting on top of the tank section, the first New Glenn booster stage should be finished in a matter of months. Although Blue Origin was pretty accurate with their timelines in the past, they had to postpone New Glenn's maiden flight by 1 year. One possible reason could be a lack of upper stages because we haven't even seen a single part of New Glenn's second stage at all. But I assume they at least have something ready by now, because it would be weird to not have any part of the second stage of the rocket around 1.5 years before its maiden flight. Now that we know New Glenn and Blue Origin a bit better, let's take a look at the launch market and see if New Glenn will be somewhere compatible against SpaceX. When it goes online, the New Glenn enters the launch market with a lot of competition. The heavy lift launch market is currently dominated by the Falcon Heavy because it is way cheaper than the only other available heavy lift launcher, the Delta IV Heavy. ULA's next generation rocket, however, the Vulcan Centaur, is going online later this year and is expected to cost a lot less than a Delta IV Heavy, probably even less than $100 million per launch. So now there are four different vehicles fighting for similar contracts: the Vulcan rocket, the Delta IV Heavy, the Falcon Heavy, and in near future New Glenn. Well, technically it's just three because ULA won't sign new contracts for the Delta IV Heavy, which is going to retire after it has conducted the last flights on the contract it still has. If we want to try to compare the three remaining vehicles, we have to take a look at four of their stats: their payload capacity to low Earth orbit and to geostationary orbit, their cost per launch, and their payload to cost ratio measured in dollars per kilogram of payload to LEO and geostationary orbit. So let's compare all three vehicles and see which one performs best. But technically there are four vehicles because Falcon Heavy can fly in a reusable as well in an expandable version with very different stats. Although New Glenn is also reusable, it will probably never be expanded at all, so it always has the same stats. Let's begin with the maximum payload capacity of our four different vehicles. The Falcon Heavy can lift a whopping 63 tons into low Earth orbit when expanded. If SpaceX tries to reuse all three boosters, the payload capacity goes down to around 35 to 40 tons, which is just a bit more than half of the capability of the expandable version. The Vulcan Centaur's maximum payload weight is variable too, depending on the number of strap-on SRBs, but its absolute maximum is expected to be 27.5 tons. New Glenn only has one configuration, which is able to carry a total of 45 tons into low Earth orbit. So technically, Falcon Heavy is the king here, but it will probably never lift its maximum payload weight. More on that later. Despite having payload capacities that high, heavy lift launchers commonly fly way lighter payloads. That is because these payloads go to geostationary orbit, which is way higher than LEO, and because of that, you need a lot more delta V to get there. Therefore, the maximum payload weights to geostationary orbit are way lower compared to the LEO payload masses of the same vehicles. The Falcon Heavy reaches 26 tons in expandable configuration, but it kinda sucks when it's reused with only 8 tons. ULA's Vulcan rocket beats SpaceX in this category with about 13 tons, but the king here will be the New Glenn with 13.6 tons. It may seem weird that the New Glenn is just capable of lifting 0.6 tons more than the Vulcan rocket, but that's because New Glenn is reusable. A rocket has to grow by a lot to achieve reusability because it needs extra fuel to get the way back to Earth, which has a negative impact on the performance of the vehicle, but a positive one on the price tag. So let's talk about the price tag. The differing costs of our 4 vehicles per launch, assuming they launch only one payload for one customer, so we have to pay for the whole rocket. And now it's getting difficult because we have no information about the cost of 2 of those 4 vehicles. Yeah, the Falcon Heavy is listed for around $150 million when expanded and about 90 when fully reused. The cost of ULA's Vulcan Centaur is currently unknown, but thought to be a bit higher than $100 million initially, but that number could rise with the addition of more SRBs. For our comparison, I will estimate the cost per launch with 6 worlds attached to the first stage of around $120 million. And then there is New Glenn. For this vehicle, no one knows the cost expected for Blue Origin, of course. Considering the size and the complexity of New Glenn's design, the cost of manufacturing one is going to be immense, but New Glenn's first stage will be reusable, pushing the cost per flight down again. If we look at the price SpaceX sells reused Falcon 9s for, which is around $36 million, and combine this with a more expensive upper stage, I'd assume New Glenn to be around the same price as Falcon Heavy, maybe even more expensive. My expectation is around $90 to $100 million per flight of New Glenn. And now it's getting really interesting. We have to talk about the payload to cost ratio of all 4 different vehicles, measured in dollars you have to pay per kilogram you want to fly. This stat is mainly there for rideshare missions where multiple customers are sharing one and the same rocket. SpaceX's Falcon Heavy is currently the rocket with the best cost to payload ratio available when expanded. When flying with its maximum capability, Falcon Heavy costs around $2,350 per kilogram, which is 6 times less than on the only other heavy launch vehicle in operation, the Delta IV Heavy. But Falcon Heavy will probably never fly its maximum payload mass, so the number of $2,570 per kilogram for the reusable variant is more realistic. The Vulcan rocket will most likely get a ratio of around $4,300 per kilogram, but that number could be a lot higher or lower depending on the number of SRBs on the first stage and so on. The last one of our vehicles, the New Glenn, achieves a ratio of around $2,200 per kilogram, which is even a little bit better than a Falcon Heavy. Compared to other heavy lift launchers, New Glenn is really cheap, especially in terms of cost per payload ratio. Nonetheless, there are only a few contracts for New Glenn. You may ask yourself how that can be the case if New Glenn is so much bigger and at the same time it is approximately the same price as other heavy lift launchers. The reason behind New Glenn not getting the attention you'd maybe expect, and Blue Origin did expect to get, is fairly simple if you have a rough idea of the current situation on the launch market. This diagram shows the number of launches for every rocket or rocket family that has conducted launches in 2020, last year. A total of 140 launches were launched, 104 launches were successful. You can clearly see who the big players in the launch market currently are: China and SpaceX. Well, China isn't really in a launch market because they mainly fly payloads for the government, not for customers like SpaceX does it. So let's look for the heavy lift launchers that conducted flights last year, because that's the market segment the New Glenn will enter someday. But wait a minute, there isn't a single heavy lift launcher on this diagram. Every single launch SpaceX has conducted was with the Falcon 9, not with Falcon Heavy, and Delta IV Heavy is listed in the others category because it only flew once for the NRO and produced a lot of trouble due to being scrubbed for months. The only other heavy lift launcher in operation is the Chinese Long March 5 rocket, which has flown 3 times in 2020, but only for the Chinese government, and this rocket is not available on the launch market. And that wasn't just the case in 2020. The Falcon Heavy, for instance, has flown 3 missions in 3 years, with the first one being a maiden flight conducted for demonstration purposes. So there were 2 flights in 3 years of this vehicle. In the same time, the Delta IV Heavy has also flown just 3 times, which means there are 2 launches of heavy lift class launchers per year on average. But why are these vehicles flying that rarely? Well, the answer is simple. The most payloads launched in the past years weren't heavy enough to require a heavy lift launcher. The most flown rocket in operation is the Falcon 9 by far, because nearly every payload can fly on it. Falcon Heavy flew some heavier payloads to geostationary orbit. At the moment, there's just no need for rockets of this size, because no one wants to launch a satellite that big. And ironically, most satellites are even designed to be as light as possible to fit on a smaller rocket that performs just as well as a bigger one, but for a smaller price. That means one thing. Yes, New Glenn can lift a lot, and yes, New Glenn has a bigger payload fairing than all operational rockets, but literally no one needs that much. New Glenn is a vehicle without any purpose. It will be more expensive than a Falcon 9 and maybe even more than a Falcon Heavy, so why would a customer buy a bigger rocket for a higher price if a smaller and cheaper one can do this job as well? SpaceX has understood that main problem of heavy lift launchers. Starship might be even bigger than New Glenn, but it is designed to cost less than a Falcon 9. If that's the case, customer will rather choose a Starship than a Falcon 9 because it will be cheaper despite being more than double the size. On the other hand, New Glenn will cost a lot more than a Falcon 9 and Starship together. And because of the ridiculous slowness of Blue Origin, well, let's be serious, how did they need more than a decade to design New Glenn? Starship will most likely already be in operation when New Glenn goes online, which reduces the chances for New Glenn to become successful even more. At the end of 2022, Blue Origin will present us a rocket that is designed to fit into a loophole in a market that doesn't exist. It is too expensive, its design is outdated from the first seconds on, because it was already overtaken by Starship. If it would have become operational like 4 years ago, it might have been a huge success, but Blue Origin's development was too slow, too little risk was taken, and not enough innovation happened. Blue Origins follows a philosophy that doesn't allow mistakes and involves a lot of planning and no space to adapt, so they can't innovate that much. Or as Elon Musk would say, if you are not failing, you're not innovating enough. That's the problem with Blue Origin. And that problem might even sound familiar, because it is the same mistake NASA did with their SLS rocket. But other than NASA, Blue Origin wasn't forced to follow this approach because it's a private enterprise that can do what they want and not dependent on the government. They were just too scared to take the necessary risks, which results in being left behind. Blue Origin won't be able to compete with SpaceX at all if they change nothing. They're doomed by their own decisions from the beginning on. They simply choose the wrong approach, so they never had a chance in the evolving launch market. And that's it for this deep dive video. Let me know your thoughts on this topic in the comments down below. Do you agree with me or do you disagree? I hope you did enjoy this very first video of its kind, and if you did so, why don't leave a like and consider to subscribe to the channel, would help me a lot. I'm out. Cheers.